A 40-year-old virgin prince hired a maid to sleep beside him, but on the first night. Before we begin this beautiful period romance story, tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I love knowing where you're joining me from. The palace had grown used to silence around Prince Friedrich von Hohenberg. It was the kind of silence that followed a man without him ever asking for it, the kind built by whispers, caution, and years of unspoken worry. Servants softened their steps near him. Ministers exchanged glances whenever he entered a room. Even the Queen, majestic in every posture, carried a shadow of concern each time her eyes rested on her 40-year-old son. That morning, her council gathered in a small chamber overlooking the gardens. The frost had barely melted, yet the air was tense, warm with discomfort. An advisor cleared his throat and said what everyone else had avoided for months. The prince needed to marry, and soon. Austria expected an heir. Diplomats were growing impatient. Rumors had begun circulating about Friedrich's inability to court any woman without turning pale as linen. The Queen listened, without expression. Inside, her heart tightened. She knew her son's limits better than anyone. Even as a child, he trembled in crowded rooms and woke from sleep drenched in fear. Age had carved dignity into his features, but not confidence. She folded her hands on the table and said quietly that they would try something unconventional, something intended only to help him sleep, to ease his terror of the night. The advisors exchanged startled looks, but no one dared challenge her. Down in the servants' hallway, Clara Weiss hurried with her tray of linens. She was used to moving quickly. Her siblings depended on the wages she earned here, and she had no right to lose a single coin. She barely had time to rest these days, yet she always kept her posture straight, her chin lifted, her mind fixed on duty. When the Queen's chamberlain appeared at the end of the corridor calling her name, she froze. She followed him to a small office where he shut the door behind them. His expression was formal, almost unreadable. He said the Queen had selected her for a special assignment and asked if she wished to earn 3 times her monthly wage. Clara blinked, stunned. Her first instinct was suspicion. No one earned that much without giving something in return. The chamberlain continued quickly, as if afraid he might lose courage. The Queen required a maid to sleep in the prince's chamber each night, not to speak to him, not to touch him, not to engage him in any improper closeness, simply to sleep on the same bed, on her own side, as a silent presence that might ease the prince's nightmares. Clara stared at him, unsure she had heard correctly. The words felt weightless, impossible, bordering on absurd. She asked why the prince needed such an arrangement. The chamberlain stiffened, reminding her of proper boundaries. The prince's life, he said, was not to be questioned by staff, but the Queen believed a gentle presence might soothe him. That was all she needed to know. Clara stood very still, her breath shallow. The proposal sounded strange, even foolish, but the money could keep her siblings fed for months. It could buy medicine her father desperately needed. It could keep her family out of debt. After a long moment, she nodded. Her hands trembled, though she tried to hide it. The chamberlain exhaled in relief, then handed her a folded set of rules, 4 simple statements written in the Queen's own hand. Do not speak unless asked. Do not touch the prince for any reason. Remain still after the lamps are extinguished. Reveal this arrangement to no one. Clara swallowed hard. The chamberlain asked her to follow. As they walked through the palace's grand halls, she tried not to stare at the portraits of past monarchs, the marble statues, the long carpets that muffled every footstep. The royal wing felt like another world entirely, one where she did not belong, though her feet were leading her straight into it. They reached a guarded door. The chamberlain nodded to the sentry, and the heavy wood swung inward. Clara stepped inside. The room was dim, warmed by a crackling fire. Books lined the walls. The scent of candle wax lingered, and there, standing by the window with his back half turned, was the prince. Friedrich looked up, startled to see her. He had the kindest eyes she had ever seen, yet they were clouded with uncertainty. He wore a dark wool coat even indoors, as if cold seeped deeper into him than others. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The chamberlain cleared his throat, explaining that Clara would begin her duties tonight. Friedrich blinked several times, absorbing the words. His gaze drifted to Clara, but he could not look at her directly for more than a heartbeat. His voice, when he finally spoke, was soft and formal. He said he understood the arrangement and would not disturb her. Clara bowed her head, unsure what one was supposed to say in such a situation. She had slept in narrow servant beds her entire life. The vision of lying down beside a prince felt unreal, almost frightening. She wondered if he felt as uneasy as she did. The answer appeared in the nervous way his fingers tightened around the book he held. A maid delivered her nightgown, a simple garment, modest even by palace standards. When the chamberlain left and the door closed, silence filled the room once more. Friedrich cleared his throat and gestured awkwardly toward a screen she could dress behind. She thanked him in a faint whisper. Behind the screen, her hands shook as she changed into the nightgown. She told herself to stay calm. She reminded herself that this was merely work. Strange work, but work nonetheless. When she emerged, the prince was already lying on his side of the bed, hands folded on his chest, eyes shut in deliberate stillness. Clara approached slowly, each step feeling heavier than the last. She lay down carefully, keeping her back turned toward him. The mattress dipped slightly beneath her weight, and for a moment neither of them breathed. The lamps were extinguished. The room fell into a gentle hush. Clara listened to the prince's breathing, uneven at first, then gradually settling. She stared into the darkness, her mind racing with questions she had no right to ask. Hours seemed to stretch, but at some point, fatigue won, and she drifted into shallow sleep. A soft sound pulled her awake. It was the prince. His breath hitched, rising too fast. His hand clenched the blanket as though gripping something else entirely. The bed shook faintly. Clara rolled onto her back, hesitant, remembering the Queen's rules. But Friedrich's face had twisted, as if he were enduring some invisible storm. His lips moved, forming broken fragments of words, none louder than a breath. She sat up slightly. "Your Highness?" she whispered, knowing she should not speak. He did not hear her. The tremor spread through his shoulders. A choked sound rose from his throat, neither cry nor gasp, but something trapped between. Clara felt her chest tighten. She had seen fear before. Her siblings sometimes woke from nightmares, trembling until she held them still. This was the same fear, but in a man who had learned to hide it too well. She reached out, stopping her hand mere inches above his arm. She remembered the rule again. Do not touch him. Her fingers trembled. The sight of his distress cut through her hesitation. Slowly, gently, she placed her hand on his shoulder. The effect was immediate. Friedrich's body jolted once, as though the nightmare shattered. His eyes opened wide. He did not pull away. Instead, he stared at her hand, then at her face, breathing hard. For a moment, neither of them spoke. She whispered an apology, withdrawing her hand, but he shook his head faintly. His voice was barely audible. "I am sorry," he said, as if the nightmare were his fault. Clara shook her head. "There is nothing to apologize for, Your Highness." Her tone was careful, warm but respectful. She kept her hands folded on her lap, afraid to move. He breathed slowly, trying to recover. She saw gratitude in his eyes, a fragile gratitude that seemed new to him. Minutes passed. The room grew quiet again. Friedrich lay back, but he did not close his eyes. He kept glancing toward her, as if reassuring himself she had not vanished. Clara turned slightly, watching him with the softest expression. She had no idea if she had broken the Queen's trust or offered the prince something he desperately needed, perhaps both. He swallowed once, then whispered, "Please, do not leave." And Clara realized the prince's nightmares may be rooted in something far deeper than fear of the dark. Clara did not move at first. The prince's whisper hung between them, fragile and earnest. She sensed it was not a command, but a plea born from years of silent suffering. She nodded gently, unsure if he could see it in the dimness. His breath eased, though he remained awake, as if afraid sleep might betray him again. She settled back onto her side, leaving a respectful space between them, but not the cold distance of before. Morning light crept quietly across the room. Friedrich had managed a few hours of rest, though he looked exhausted when he rose. Clara pretended to be asleep so he wouldn't feel embarrassed. She heard him step carefully across the floor, heard the soft rustle of fabric as he dressed. When the chamberlain arrived to escort him to breakfast with the Queen, the prince spoke his first confident words of the day. He said he had slept better. Clara caught the chamberlain's surprised exhale. Once alone, Clara returned to her daily duties in the service wing. She kept her head down, folding linens and scrubbing surfaces until her hands grew stiff. She told no one where she had been the night before. But her thoughts drifted back to the prince's trembling hands, his frantic breath, the single moment her touch had anchored him. She wondered if she had ruined everything by breaking the rule. Perhaps the queen would dismiss her at once. She tried to dismiss the worry, but it clung stubbornly. Late that afternoon, a lady-in-waiting approached her with an unreadable expression. "The queen requests you," she said, and Clara's heart dropped like a stone. She followed the woman through the corridors, every step tightening her nerves. When she entered the queen's private sitting room, the monarch sat by the window, sorting through correspondence. Her posture was composed, but her eyes, when they lifted, held a sharpness Clara felt instantly. The queen asked how the night had passed. Her tone was calm, but the question carried weight. Clara hesitated. She did not want to lie, yet she feared the truth. She managed a careful response. "The prince slept, Your Majesty." The queen noticed her hesitation. Her eyebrow lifted slightly. She asked if anything unusual had occurred. Clara's throat tightened. She lowered her gaze and replied that she had tried her best to follow the instructions. It was not a lie, but not the full truth either. The queen studied her for a few seconds more before dismissing her with a simple nod. Clara stepped out of the room, feeling as though she had carried a heavy stone into her chest. She walked back to the servants' corridor with hurried steps, wishing the silence around her could explain what she could not say aloud. Hours passed. When evening returned and she made her way to the prince's quarters, her body was tense with anticipation. She knocked softly. Friedrich opened the door himself, a gesture that startled her. Princes did not open their own doors. He stepped aside for her to enter, his expression polite, but his eyes showed something gentler. He asked if the queen had spoken to her. She admitted she had. He looked troubled, then apologized again for any scrutiny she faced on his account. Clara assured him it was no fault of his. Her voice was steady, though her heart beat quickly. The prince seemed relieved by her tone, as though expecting her to be angry or afraid. When they prepared for sleep, Friedrich seemed restless. He paced once near the window, muttering something about the council's expectations. Clara watched him quietly, her hands folded in her lap. She had never seen him walk with such agitation. He stopped suddenly and turned toward her. "May I ask you something?" His voice was uncertain. She nodded. He took a moment before continuing. "When I was asleep, did I say anything?" Clara hesitated. She remembered the few broken words he whispered during his nightmare. She chose her answer carefully. "Only your name, Highness." He seemed surprised, even doubtful. "My name? Are you certain?" She nodded, though she kept the rest to herself. She did not mention the trembling, the fear, the way he grabbed the blanket like a frightened child. He ran a hand through his hair, clearly troubled by his own mind. He said he did not understand why such episodes returned after so many years. Clara kept her voice gentle, suggesting that perhaps the new pressures of the court had unsettled his rest. He gave a humorless smile at that. "The court has always unsettled me," he said, "but not like this." When he lay down, he seemed to brace himself for the night. Clara settled on her side, careful not to move too much. She wished she could offer comfort, but the memory of her broken rule held her still. Minutes passed. The room dimmed. Friedrich's breathing slowed, then softened. She watched the steady rise and fall of his chest. For a while, she thought he might sleep peacefully. Then he stirred, his brow furrowed, his lips parted, murmuring disjointed syllables. Clara sat up, tense. She whispered his name, hoping he would wake before the nightmare took hold. Instead, he slipped deeper into unrest, his breath hitching, his hand clutching the sheet again. Clara wanted to reach out, but she forced her hands to stay still. The Queen's rule echoed in her mind. She whispered again, a little louder. His eyelids tightened in distress. Finally, unable to watch his suffering any longer, she leaned closer and whispered his name more firmly. His eyes shot open. His breath came fast. But this time he did not look confused or startled. He looked relieved to see her face so close. Clara moved back quickly, apologizing for waking him. He shook his head. "Please." "Do not apologize," he said softly. "I fear what happens when I fall asleep." His honesty surprised her. She had assumed the nightmares were something he tried to hide. Instead, he spoke of them plainly, as though they had exhausted him to the point of confession. She asked if there was anything she could do. He looked at her with hesitation, then said he did not know. He confessed he had not spoken to anyone about these dreams in years. Not even my mother, he added quietly. She carries enough burdens of her own. Clara nodded in understanding. She sensed the loneliness behind his words, a loneliness far deeper than sleepless nights. After a long silence, Friedrich asked something unexpected. "Why do you not fear me?" Clara blinked, surprised. "Fear you, Highness." He looked away, embarrassed. "Others do. They fear my silence, my awkwardness, my inability to be what a prince should be." She felt an ache for him, the kind that rose naturally when a person revealed a wound they had carried too long. She told him gently that fear was not the word anyone should use for him, that he was kind, respectful, and carrying burdens alone no one could bear without tremor. His gaze softened at her words, though he looked away quickly as though unaccustomed to such sincerity. Later he drifted back to sleep, slower this time, as if relying on her voice lingering in the darkness. Clara watched him for a moment, thinking of the quiet strength he did not realize he possessed. She pulled the blanket over her knees, wondering how close she was treading to boundaries she could not cross. As the hours passed, Friedrich seemed to sleep more peacefully. Clara remained awake, watching the moonlight shift across the room, thinking of the Queen's questions and Friedrich's fragile trust. She wondered how long she could remain in this strange role before the uncertainty consumed her. Just before dawn, Friedrich stirred awake. He looked over at her, not startled but curious. "How long have you been watching me?" he asked. Clara froze at the prince's question. His voice carried no accusation, only curiosity mixed with a hint of confusion. She tried to speak calmly, explaining she had only wished to make sure he slept without distress. Friedrich blinked slowly, studying her with an expression far softer than she expected. He whispered that he hoped she had not been frightened by his restlessness. She shook her head at once. Nothing about him frightened her. He seemed almost relieved, though his gaze drifted to the edge of the blanket, as though embarrassed by his own vulnerability. After a moment, he murmured an apology for disturbing her night. Clara told him gently that she did not mind. The prince looked up, surprised that she spoke with such sincerity. For a brief second, he held her gaze before looking away again, unable to manage the simple intimacy of eye contact. They rose from the bed in silence. Friedrich kept his distance, as though afraid he might break something delicate simply by standing too near. When he left for morning duties, Clara sensed the weight on his shoulders had changed in shape. Not lighter, but sharing now a thread of connection he did not know how to name. The Queen's summons reached her by midday. Clara felt the air tighten around her even before she stepped into the royal sitting room. Queen Adelheid dismissed her attendants, leaving the two alone. The Queen did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Her authority filled the room like an invisible wall. She asked again about the night. This time her tone sharpened slightly, as if expecting truth that had not been offered before. Clara tried to choose her words with care. She said the prince had slept, more peacefully than the night before. The Queen leaned forward. "That is not what I asked." Clara swallowed and forced herself to meet the Queen's gaze. She admitted that he had woken from a nightmare. The Queen's lips tightened at the word, as if it reopened a wound she wished to keep closed. "Did you follow the rules?" the Queen asked. Clara hesitated. It lasted only a heartbeat, but it was enough. The Queen saw everything in that pause: fear, guilt, uncertainty. She dismissed Clara with a firm wave of her hand and instructed her to remember her place. Clara left the room with her pulse pounding, humiliated that she had failed to reassure the Queen, frightened that she had disappointed her only employer. She returned to her duties, scrubbing the carved edges of a mahogany wardrobe without truly seeing her own hands. Her thoughts wandered to the prince. His trembling during the nightmare, his apology, the gentleness in his voice when he asked if she had been watching him. She clung to the hope that the Queen would not dismiss her at once. When evening fell, Clara made her way back to the prince's chambers. Friedrich opened the door almost immediately, as though waiting for her. He looked tense, pacing near the window with troubled steps. "Did my mother speak with you?" he asked. Clara lowered her eyes and nodded. Friedrich let out a long breath, almost a sigh. "I feared she might have pressed you too harshly." Clara assured him that the Queen had only asked about the night. Friedrich gave a faint, humorless smile. My mother has carried the court's expectations on her shoulders for decades. She forgets how heavy the load becomes for those around her. His tone held no resentment, only quiet understanding. Later that night, as they prepared for rest, Friedrich tried to read aloud from a book of poetry. His voice trembled at first, but steadied after a few lines. Clara listened, surprised by how soothing his voice became as he allowed himself to speak in a rhythm rather than broken sentences. When he stopped abruptly, she asked softly why he had chosen that poem. He hesitated. My tutor read it to me when I was a boy. He paused again, uncertain how much to reveal. Before the nightmares began, he finished. Clara felt a small ache inside her. She wanted to ask what had caused them, but she knew it was not her place. Still, Friedrich seemed to sense the question in her silence. He looked down at the book. I used to sleep peacefully. Then something changed. Something I could not name. Clara's breath caught. She asked what he meant. He shook his head. I remember only fragments. A room I did not want to enter. Voices arguing. The feeling of being very small. Clara felt her attention sharpen. A room? He nodded, eyes distant. A room with a name I cannot recall. It lies somewhere in this palace, though it has been years since I thought of it. Her mind raced. Had she heard him whisper something in the night? She tried to remember the faint syllables he had spoken during his dream. They had sounded like a place, not a person. She asked if the room still existed. He said he did not know. His father had kept many private spaces locked, and after his passing, several corridors in the older wing had been sealed entirely. Clara made no comment, but determination flickered quietly within her. She would search for any hint of such a room, not out of curiosity, but because she could not bear the thought of Friedrich living in fear of something unnamed. Friedrich drifted into sleep faster than expected. Clara remained awake long enough to see his breathing soften. She waited until she was certain he slept deeply, before whispering the faint syllable he had cried the previous night. It sounded like the beginning of a room's name, though she could not be entirely sure. She repeated it silently, committing it to memory. The next morning, while the prince attended a council meeting, Clara used her free hour to slip into the older parts of the palace. The corridors were quiet, the lamps unlit. Dust gathered along the edges of forgotten doors. She followed the naming patterns carved into the wooden plaques above each threshold, searching for something that resembled the sound Friedrich had uttered in his dream. She found a corridor that matched the tone of his murmured word. The door at the end was locked, the plaque above it so faded she could barely read it. She leaned closer, tracing the old letters with her fingertip. Her heart beat faster. She whispered the name aloud. It matched the sound she remembered from Friedrich's dream. Before she could push further, a voice behind her startled her. "What are you doing here?" She spun around and found an elderly caretaker holding a bucket and mop. He frowned at her, not unkindly, but with suspicion. "This wing is closed to staff." Clara apologized quickly and asked about the room. The caretaker stiffened. That room was sealed a long time ago. She asked why. He hesitated, looking down the corridor as though afraid someone might hear him. It was used by the late king. After an incident, no one entered again. He refused to say more. Clara thanked him and hurried back to her duties, her mind racing with questions. When evening came, she returned to the prince's chambers. Friedrich noticed her uneasy expression immediately. "Did something happen?" he asked. She sat down slowly and told him she had found a door that matched the name he'd murmured. Friedrich's breath caught. He sat straighter, eyes fixed on her. "Where is it?" he asked. She described the corridor. He listened intently, his face pale. "I have not walked that corridor since I was a child," he murmured. Clara felt the tension in his voice. She asked gently if he wished to forget it. He shook his head. "I wish to understand it." Clara hesitated, unsure if she should reveal the caretaker's words. After a moment, she told him. The prince's hands tightened. "An incident," he repeated softly. But he seemed more alarmed by the secrecy surrounding the room than by the word itself, as if frightened that the truth lay somewhere he had been forbidden to explore. When silence settled between them, Friedrich looked at her with a tremor of hope and fear mingled together. Clara felt the air shift before he spoke. His voice trembled, not with weakness, but with the weight of the request forming inside him. "Clara, will you go there with me?" Clara did not answer immediately. The prince's request was quiet, but it carried a weight that made her breath catch. She finally nodded, not because she felt brave, but because she could not bear to see him face whatever memory lingered in that sealed room alone. Friedrich exhaled, as if her agreement lifted something heavy from his chest. They met the next afternoon under the quiet pretext of inspecting unused corridors for necessary cleaning. Clara walked half a step ahead, carrying a small ring of keys borrowed from the housekeeping steward. Friedrich followed with careful steps, glancing over his shoulder at every sound. His unease was palpable, though he tried to keep his posture straight. When they reached the abandoned corridor, the air felt colder, almost forgotten by the palace itself. Clara approached the faded plaque above the sealed door. Friedrich stared at the letters, a muscle tightening in his jaw. He whispered that he remembered standing here as a child, terrified without knowing why. Clara selected the correct key, slid it into the lock, and turned it gently. The door creaked open. Inside, the room was dim and dusty, but not frightening. Old furniture sat beneath sheets. A cracked mirror leaned against the wall. Nothing seemed dangerous or mysterious, only forgotten. Friedrich stepped in hesitantly, almost expecting a ghost of memory to seize him. But the room offered no revelations, only stillness. Clara waited as he walked slowly around the space. He touched the covered desk, then a chair, as if expecting them to tell him something. After a moment, he stopped in the far corner. There was nothing special there, just a patch of wall lightened by once hanging artwork. Yet he stared at it with a faint tremor. "I remember standing here," he said quietly. "My father was angry. I could not speak. I could not breathe." Clara stepped closer, though she kept a respectful distance. She asked what had frightened him. He shook his head. "It wasn't fear of him. My father was strict, but not cruel. It was the shame. I was always disappointing him." Clara felt a soft ache at those words. She asked gently what had happened. Friedrich sank onto the covered bench. "I fainted in public, during a ceremony. He brought me here after, told me I had embarrassed him. He didn't shout. That made it worse. He said the court needed strength, not trembling." Clara listened in silence, letting him speak at his own pace. He looked up at her. "I suppose that is when the nightmares began. I never wanted to fall asleep again because I feared waking to someone's disappointment." His voice quivered on the last word. Clara stepped closer, not touching him, but offering her presence the way she had the night before. Her silence was gentle, reassuring. Friedrich breathed slowly, the air leaving him in a fragile stream. "Thank you for coming here with me," he said. "I do not think I could have stepped inside alone." Clara gave a small nod. She opened her mouth to speak, but a sudden voice from the doorway froze both of them. "What is the meaning of this?" Countess von Ebersberg stood framed in the entrance, her expression a blend of surprise and satisfaction. She stepped into the room with calculated poise, her skirts gliding across the dust-coated floor. Her eyes narrowed as they moved between the prince and Clara. Clara's heart dropped. Friedrich straightened at once, trying to form an explanation, but his words tangled. He said something about inspecting old chambers for possible restoration, but even he seemed unconvinced by the excuse. The Countess raised an eyebrow. "Restoration? With a maid? Alone?" She smiled thinly. "Does Her Majesty know of this?" Friedrich's throat tightened. "This is none of your concern, Countess," he said, trying to speak firmly, but the Countess bowed her head in feigned humility. "Of course. Forgive me. The court will be relieved to know you are broadening your company." Clara felt the sting of her tone, though she kept her gaze down. The Countess's whisper carried the promise of gossip, of malicious twists ready to spread like wildfire. She swept from the room with a graceful turn, leaving behind an icy silence. Friedrich closed his eyes briefly, visibly shaken. "I am sorry," he whispered. "I should not have brought you here." Clara shook her head at once. "You did nothing wrong, Your Highness." But her voice trembled slightly. She knew what the Countess had seen, what assumptions would form. They walked out of the corridor together, both too quiet. As they reached the more populated halls, Friedrich forced himself to straighten, but Clara sensed the fear beneath his composure, not of the Countess, but of what her whisper might unleash. That evening, the Queen demanded Clara's presence. Her voice was steady, but her displeasure unmistakable. She said members of the court had expressed concern. She asked why Clara had been seen in the old wing with the prince. Clara tried to speak honestly, saying the prince had wished to revisit a childhood memory. But the Queen's expression did not soften. "You were given a simple task," the Queen said. "Remain unseen, remain silent, remain appropriate." Clara lowered her head, a burning embarrassment rising in her chest. She apologized. The Queen dismissed her sharply, reminding her that one misstep from a servant could destroy an entire reputation, especially that of her son. Clara left the audience chamber feeling small, as if she had been reduced to the weight of her own shoes. The reprimand stung, not because of harshness, but because it fed every fear she already carried, that she did not belong in the prince's world, that any kindness she offered him could be twisted into something improper. When she returned to the prince's chambers for the night, Friedrich looked at her with immediate concern. "My mother spoke with you." Clara nodded once. He closed his eyes for a moment, guilt filling his expression. "I am sorry she reprimanded you," he murmured. "It was not your fault." Clara said softly, "She fears for you, for the monarchy. She fears scandal." Friedrich laughed bitterly. "I do not need her to fear for me. I need her to trust me." Clara watched him pace the room. His steps were sharper tonight, his voice carrying an edge he rarely allowed. He turned suddenly toward her. "Tell me something, Clara. If you were free to choose, would you stay? Or would you leave this arrangement the moment you were permitted?" The question struck her unexpectedly. She stared at him, her breath unsteady. She wanted to answer, to say she would stay, that she wished to help him, that she felt drawn to him in a way she did not fully understand. But fear held her silent. Not fear of him, but of her own heart, of the consequences, of the walls of hierarchy that surrounded them both. She opened her mouth. No words came. A quiet knock interrupted the moment. Clara and the prince both turned. Someone slid a folded note beneath the door and walked away without a sound. Friedrich hesitated, then picked it up and handed it to Clara. Her fingers trembled as she unfolded the paper. It contained only one sentence: "You are being watched." Clara stared at the note, its single sentence tightening around her like a cold hand. She read it again, hoping the words might shift into something less alarming, but they remained stark. "You are being watched." Her pulse quickened. She looked up at Friedrich, whose expression darkened with concern the moment he saw her face. "Who delivered it?" he asked. His voice was low, careful. Clara shook her head, still gripping the paper. I don't know. I didn't see anyone." Friedrich frowned, stepping toward the door and opening it just enough to peer into the corridor. There was no one. Only the dim glow of lamps and the faint echo of distant footsteps. He shut the door slowly. "May I see the note?" She hesitated, then handed it to him. He read it once, his jaw tightening. He folded it with deliberate calm, though his fingers trembled slightly. "This is meant to intimidate you, or to intimidate me through you." Clara swallowed, feeling her throat tighten. She asked if he believed it was the Countess. Friedrich shook his head. "The Countess spreads whispers, not threats. Whoever wrote this meant to frighten you quietly." Clara drew a breath. "Should I inform the Queen?" Friedrich's eyes flickered with something unreadable. "If you show her this, she will end the arrangement at once, and perhaps remove you from the palace entirely." Clara's heart dropped. He stepped closer, his voice gentler. "I don't want you to be harmed by this, but I don't want you to be sent away either." Clara lowered her gaze, unsure how to hold the weight of both fears at once. She tucked the note into her apron pocket, though she dreaded its presence against her skin. Friedrich seemed about to speak again when he stopped abruptly, as though realizing something he had not considered. His voice quieted. "Did anyone see you in the old wing today besides the Countess?" Clara hesitated. "An elderly caretaker. He seemed harmless, but he looked afraid to speak of the room." Friedrich's brow furrowed. "Afraid?" She nodded, as if recalling something he shouldn't. Friedrich paced once, the wooden floor creaking under his steps. "There are more secrets in this palace than I ever understood." Clara watched him, torn between fear and a strange, growing resolve. She asked if he remembered anything else about the room. He paused, pressing his fingers to his temples, a voice arguing, a heavy door closing, a feeling of being alone. He exhaled shakily. I don't know if it was real, or if my mind invented it. Clara stepped closer before she realized she had moved. Your Highness, perhaps the truth is simpler than it feels. Perhaps it was only a moment of harsh words, nothing more. Friedrich gave a faint, tired smile. Perhaps. But then why does it haunt me still? She had no answer. They stood in silence until he gestured toward the table. Will you sit with me for a moment, just until the lamps dim? She nodded, though her heart remained tight around the warning in her pocket. They sat across from each other, and for the first time since she entered the palace, she saw a quiet determination beneath his usual gentleness. Tell me what you found in the archives today, he said. Not a command. An invitation. Clara hesitated, then explained the small details she gathered from the caretaker. The sealed room, the former king's strict rules, the sense that something had happened that no one wished to repeat. When she described the caretaker's expression, Friedrich leaned back slightly, eyes narrowed in thought. My father rarely spoke of his childhood, and even less of the older palace. He kept his authority through silence and order. Perhaps he believed that locking away rooms locked away their memories too. Clara looked at him. But memories do not stay locked, Your Highness. He gave a soft, surprised laugh. No, they do not. Later, when night settled fully, they prepared for sleep. Clara changed behind the screen, her hands clumsy with unease. When she stepped out, Friedrich sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the folded note in his hand. He rose quickly, slipping the paper into a drawer, as if wanting to shield her from it. You need not be afraid, he said. His voice was calmer now, more certain. I will not allow anything to happen to you. Clara felt warmth stir in her chest at his words, but she did not show it. She simply nodded and lay down on her side of the bed, keeping her breathing steady. Friedrich lay down as well, turning his face toward the ceiling. His expression remained tense, but his shoulders seemed less burdened than the previous night. After a few minutes of silence, he spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. Clara, if you ever feel unsafe, tell me at once. No matter the rule, no matter who else is present. She nodded, though he could not see it in the dark. I will, Your Highness. When Friedrich finally drifted into sleep, Clara remained awake. She listened to his breathing until it steadied. Only then did she close her eyes, though rest refused to come. Her mind replayed the caretaker's fear, the Countess's satisfaction, the Queen's reprimand, and the stark words of the note. You are being watched. The morning came too quickly. Clara rose before Friedrich stirred, smoothing the blankets and adjusting her apron. She glanced at the drawer where he had hidden the note, wondering if it was still there. She hoped he had burned it, though she doubted he would do anything secretly while trying to protect her. When Friedrich awoke, he looked at her as if checking she was truly present. Good morning, he said softly. She bowed her head. Good morning, Your Highness. He hesitated, then asked if she had rested. She lied gently, saying she had. He seemed relieved, though his eyes hinted he did not fully believe her. After he left for his morning council meeting, Clara slipped into the archives with more urgency than the day before. She searched old maps, inventory logs, anything that might reveal the sealed room's purpose. Most documents were too faded to read, but one ledger mentioned repairs made after the unfortunate event. No details, only a date, nearly 30 years ago. She whispered the date under her breath, trying to connect it to anything the prince had said. Nothing came. But she noticed something else. The ledger had been marked by two different hands, one neat and formal, one hurried. Written beside the entry in faint pencil were the words, "Do not reopen." She left the archives with a chill that had nothing to do with the winter air. That evening, when she returned to the prince's chambers, Friedrich looked more unsettled than before. The council was tense today, he said. My mother is alarmed by rumors spreading in the court. Clara's heart tightened. About the old wing? Or about me? Friedrich hesitated. Both. Clara lowered her gaze. Should I be moved to another post? If my presence troubles the court, he cut her off gently. No, you have done nothing wrong. I will not permit them to twist kindness into suspicion. His voice trembled with quiet conviction. Before she could answer, he stepped closer. You said yesterday you heard the caretaker speak of fear. Did he say why? Clara shook her head. only that something had happened, something the palace wished to forget. Friedrich looked toward the window, thinking. Then he turned back to her. "Show me where you found that ledger." Clara shook her head quickly. "Your Highness, it was in the service archives. You should not—" He lifted a hand gently. "I should not hide from the truth any longer." She hesitated, but before she could speak, a sudden knock echoed through the room. Not soft, not polite, sharp, intentional. Both of them turned. The Queen stood in the doorway, her face pale with urgency. Friedrich stepped toward her. "Mother, what is—" She lifted a hand to silence him. "I have been informed," she said, her gaze moving between them, "that a servant has been seen searching restricted corridors." Clara felt her breath leave her. "And that servant is you." Clara stood frozen beneath the Queen's gaze, unable to form a single word. The chamber felt suddenly smaller, as though the walls had leaned inward. The Queen stepped inside, closing the door sharply behind her. Her voice, though soft, carried a firmness that made every part of Clara's body tense. "Explain yourself," she said. Clara opened her mouth, but nothing came. The Queen's eyes narrowed. Friedrich stepped between them at once, his voice steady despite the fear tightening his features. "Mother, she did nothing wrong. I asked her to search that corridor with me." The Queen turned to him sharply. "And why, Friedrich, would you wander into a sealed wing with a maid at your side?" Friedrich hesitated. Clara saw him draw a breath as if preparing to reveal everything, the nightmares, the forgotten memory, the sealed room. But he stopped himself. The Queen waited, her face unreadable. He finally said, "Quieter. I wish to understand something from my childhood." The Queen's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "That wing was closed for a reason. There is nothing there you need to revisit." Her eyes shifted to Clara again, colder this time, and nothing there that concerns her at all. Clara felt the weight of those words as though she had been pushed. She lowered her gaze, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "Your Majesty, I only wished to help the prince." He was troubled. The Queen raised a hand to silence her. "Help him, or involve yourself in matters you cannot possibly understand." Friedrich flinched at that. "Mother, be fair." The Queen cut him off again. "Fair? Fair would be protecting this household from scandal. Fair would be keeping the court from speculating why a servant wanders the palace at her leisure." Clara's face burned. She whispered an apology, though humiliation tightened her throat. "I meant no harm." The Queen exhaled sharply, then turned back toward her son. "Friedrich, you must maintain boundaries. Whatever comfort this arrangement provides, the court must never believe it is anything more. Do you understand?" Clara felt the sting beneath the words, subtle but unmistakable. She was the danger. She was the rumor waiting to ignite. Friedrich seemed to hear it too. His jaw tightened, but he nodded slowly. The Queen started for the door, then paused. "For the sake of this house," she said quietly, "the maid will remain at her post tonight. But I will be watching both of you." Without waiting for a response, she swept out of the room, leaving tension in her wake. When the door closed, Friedrich turned to Clara immediately. "I am sorry. I am so terribly sorry. You did nothing wrong." She shook her head. She felt small but not defeated. "I crossed a boundary. I should not have been in that corridor alone." Friedrich's eyes softened painfully. "You were not alone. I asked you to go with me, and I will say so again if anyone questions it." Clara looked at him, surprised by the firmness in his tone. His usual hesitation was gone, replaced by something deeper. Quiet, steady, fragile but determined. She nodded faintly, though the fear remained in her stomach. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I know this is difficult for you, but please do not let my mother's words frighten you away." Clara offered him a small, unsure smile. "I am only worried I might cause trouble for you." He shook his head. "You have done the opposite. You are the reason I can sleep at all." Her breath caught, though she tried to hide it. The rest of the evening unfolded in uneasy quiet. Friedrich tried to read, but his voice faltered. Clara tended to the lamps and folded her apron twice, just to keep her hands steady. Neither mentioned the warning note, though both felt its presence like a shadow in the room. When it grew late and they prepared for sleep, the prince stopped her just as she reached for the blanket. "Clara, may I ask something without causing alarm?" She looked up. "Of course, Your Highness." He hesitated, then said softly, "Did the caretaker say anything else? Anything about the room?" Clara thought carefully. Only that it was sealed after an incident. He wouldn't say what. Friedrich swallowed. "My mother seemed unsettled when I mentioned my memories of that wing, as if she feared something." Clara nodded slowly. "I noticed that as well." He looked at her a moment longer, then lay down. She did the same. The room dimmed to silence, and for a while the tension eased as their breathing fell into a quiet rhythm, but Clara could not sleep. The Queen's reprimand replayed in her mind, the caretaker's fear, the weight of the note burning in her pocket. And something else, something she had seen in Friedrich's eyes when he spoke of his father's disappointment. She turned gently to her side, watching him. His face was calm in sleep, almost peaceful. She wondered how a man so gentle could carry so much pain. Hours passed. The moon shifted. At some point, Clara's eyes drifted closed. A soft noise pulled her awake. Friedrich stirred, though not in distress this time. He murmured something unintelligible, then turned slightly toward her, his breath steady. No nightmare, only restless sleep. Clara relaxed. The morning came with soft light filtering through the curtains. Friedrich woke slowly, as if savoring the rare feeling of rest. He sat up, blinking toward her. "Did you sleep well?" he asked. She nodded, though her own sleep had been light. Before either could say more, the door burst open unexpectedly. The chamberlain stood at the threshold, breathless. "Your Highness?" "The Queen requests you at once. It is urgent." Friedrich's expression tightened. "What has happened?" The chamberlain hesitated. "It concerns rumors spreading among the council." Clara felt her stomach sink. Friedrich rose, dressed quickly, and followed the chamberlain out the door. He paused only once to look back at Clara with a faint, reassuring nod before disappearing into the hallway. She waited for hours. Every small noise made her flinch. Every footstep in the corridor made her fear someone had come to drag her away in disgrace. But no one came. By midday, she could wait no longer. She left the prince's chamber and went in search of her usual duties, hoping work might steady her thoughts. As she turned a corner near the palace's east gallery, she heard voices, familiar, clipped, disdainful. Two ladies of the court whispered together near a window. I saw her myself, walking alone in the northern wing. With the prince? Not then. But she has been inside his chambers. Why else would the Queen be so tense? Clara stepped back quickly before they noticed her. Her hands shook. The rumor was spreading faster than she feared. She turned to retreat quietly down the hall, and stopped. Countess von Ebersberg stood waiting at the end of the corridor, as if she had been expecting her. The Countess smiled, slow and thin. "My dear Miss Weiss," she said, taking a step forward, "you and I must speak." Her eyes gleamed with cold satisfaction. "But first, why is the prince wandering sealed rooms with a maid at his side?" Clara stood very still. The Countess approached with graceful steps, her gloved hands folded neatly in front of her. She carried the poised smile of someone who believed she had already won a battle no one else knew was being fought. "I asked you a question, Miss Weiss," the Countess said. Her tone was smooth, almost polite, but edged with sharp intent. "Why is the prince wandering sealed rooms with a maid at his side?" Clara lowered her gaze. "Your ladyship, I fear you misunderstand." The Countess lifted a hand delicately. "Spare me the pleasantries. I know exactly what I saw. A prince, alone with a servant, in a forgotten wing of the palace." She let those words linger as if savoring them. Clara straightened her shoulders, though her hands trembled. "I accompanied His Highness at his request. He wished to inspect—" The Countess laughed softly, interrupting her. "Oh, my dear, do not insult my intelligence. Princes do not inspect abandoned chambers with housemaids as their guides." Clara felt her chest tighten. She tried again, more firmly this time. "His Highness was searching for something from his childhood, something that troubled him. I wished only to help him." The Countess's smile vanished. Help him? Or influence him? Draw his attention? His sympathy? Clara stepped back, stung by the accusation. "I would never presume such a thing. I serve with respect. Nothing more." The Countess leaned in slightly. "That is precisely what concerns me. Respect is easily confused with affection by those who live sheltered lives." A man like the prince. She paused, eyes flicking upward, as though selecting her next words with care. A man who has never allowed a woman near him is vulnerable to the smallest kindness. Clara's breath caught. I did not. The Countess cut her off once more. You did. Whether intentionally or not, you have placed yourself in his confidence. And the prince, she sighed dramatically, the prince appears to seek your company. Clara felt heat rise in her face, not from shame but from fear of how twisted the situation could become in the wrong mouths. Your ladyship, if you believe there is impropriety, the Countess waved a finger. Oh, I do not believe anything yet, but others might. And what others believe is far more dangerous than the truth. Clara's pulse quickened. What do you want of me? The Countess's smile returned. Slow, triumphant. I want you to remove yourself before the damage becomes irreversible. The prince must present himself as future king, not as a man entangled in the company of a servant. You will decline evening duty tonight, perhaps even request reassignment. A discreet move for your own good. Clara tightened her hands at her sides. I do not wish to abandon my post. The Countess's eyes sparkled. Then you wish to abandon the prince's reputation? The court will not tolerate appearances that raise questions, nor will the Queen. Clara swallowed hard. She wanted to defend herself, but any answer felt inadequate under the Countess's watchful gaze. The Countess took a step closer, lowering her voice to a whisper. You think you are helping him. You are not. You are harming him, though neither of you sees it yet. End this quietly before someone decides to end it for you. Before Clara could respond, hurried footsteps approached. A footman rounded the corner, stopping short when he saw both women. He bowed quickly. Miss Weiss, Her Majesty requests your presence immediately. Clara's stomach dropped, but the Countess only nodded in satisfaction. Go, my dear, and choose your words wisely. As Clara followed the footman, the hallway felt colder. Each step tightened the knot inside her chest. She rehearsed explanations in her mind, yet each one sounded feeble the moment she formed it. When she entered the Queen's private salon, Queen Adelheid stood with her back turned, staring out the window. Clara curtsied deeply. Your Majesty. The Queen did not turn at first. I have received troubling news, she said. Her tone was calm, but too controlled. Members of the court claim you have been seen wandering inappropriate sections of the palace. They claim you were alone with my son. They claim he has developed an attachment. Clara's breath faltered. Your Majesty, I swear I meant no disrespect to the household. The prince asked me. The Queen turned sharply. That is precisely the problem. You have allowed my son to rely on you in a way no servant should permit. Clara felt the words like a blow. I only wished to comfort him when he was troubled. Nothing improper has ever occurred. The Queen studied her face with penetrating eyes. You broke the rule, did you not? The first night. Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks. He was in distress, Your Majesty. I acted only out of concern. I touched his arm so he would wake from a nightmare. The Queen closed her eyes briefly, pained. I feared as much. It was a simple rule, a necessary one. You did not understand what risk it carried. Clara's voice thickened. I am sorry. I did not intend to upset the prince. Her Majesty shook her head. You did not upset him. You bonded him. Those words struck deeper than any reprimand. Clara tried to speak, but the Queen continued. My son has lived under great pressure. He finds solace where he can, but solace becomes dependence, and dependence becomes dangerous. Clara felt tears burning behind her eyes, but she kept them from falling. If Your Majesty wishes me to leave my post, the Queen held up a hand. That is not my wish. Not yet. But you must keep your distance. No more wandering the palace, no more moments alone outside the assigned hours, and no more touching him under any circumstance. Do you understand? Clara nodded. Yes, Your Majesty. The Queen dismissed her. Clara left the room feeling both relieved and devastated. She hurried back to the servants' quarters, hoping to disappear into routine. But her thoughts churned with questions she could not answer, fears she could not name. Evening came too quickly. When she returned to the prince's chambers, Friedrich stood waiting, tension visible in every line of his posture. My mother accused you, didn't she? Clara shook her head gently. She expressed concern. Nothing more. He stepped closer. And the Countess? Did she speak to you? Clara looked away. She did. Friedrich's voice sharpened. What did she say? Clara hesitated. She said that our arrangement brings rumors, that I should request reassignment. Friedrich's expression shifted. Hurt first, then anger, then something deeper. That is absurd, he whispered. You have done nothing but help me. Clara forced a small smile. Help can look like harm in the wrong eyes. He shook his head. I refuse to lose the only person who has offered me kindness without judgment. His words trembled at the edges. Full of sincerity, he seemed almost afraid to reveal. Clara's heart tightened painfully at the sound of them. They prepared for bed as usual, though everything felt changed. The air was heavier, the silence fuller. When the lamps dimmed, Friedrich remained propped against the headboard, unable to lie down. Clara watched him, concerned. He finally spoke. I cannot lose your presence, Clara. Not now. Not when I have finally begun to breathe. Her breath caught. Your Highness! But the words tangled inside her. Before she could untangle them, a sharp knock sounded at the door, not gentle, not hesitant. Friedrich rose at once. Clara felt her pulse race. The Chamberlain's voice came from the other side. Your Highness, forgive the hour, but there is a matter of utmost urgency. Her Majesty requests your presence, and Miss Weiss, she is to come as well. The Chamberlain's words hung in the air like a draught from an open window. Neither Clara nor Friedrich moved at first. It was as if the walls themselves were listening. The prince exchanged a quick glance with her, a silent reassurance, before he opened the door. The Chamberlain stepped back respectfully, though his eyes flickered with something tense and urgent. Her Majesty is waiting in the council salon, he said. His voice was tight. She insists on speaking to both of you at once. Friedrich nodded, then turned to Clara. She looked pale but steady. He offered his arm. Not touching her, only presenting it for guidance, she followed him into the corridor, the Chamberlain trailing behind. Their footsteps echoed with a solemn rhythm. As they walked, Friedrich leaned slightly toward her and whispered, Do not fear. Whatever this is, we will face it together. Clara swallowed hard. She nodded, though her heart beat painfully fast. They reached the council salon. 2 guards opened the doors. Inside, the Queen stood alone near the fireplace, her hands clasped behind her back. She turned slowly when she heard them enter. Friedrich, Miss Weiss, thank you for coming at once. The Queen's voice held neither anger nor relief, only strain. Mother, Friedrich began, what has happened? The Queen gestured for both of them to step closer. There are rumors spreading beyond the palace walls, not just among the court, but among foreign diplomatic circles. Clara's breath caught. Foreign circles? How could that be? The Queen continued. A report was delivered tonight claiming the prince has entered a private arrangement with a maid, an arrangement described as intimate. Friedrich stiffened. That is a lie. Clara's hands fumbled at her sides. Your Majesty, nothing inappropriate has ever. The Queen lifted a hand gently to silence her. I have defended you both, she said, her voice low. But the Countess has been whispering to ministers, and ministers have been whispering to ambassadors. This situation is no longer contained. Friedrich stepped forward, jaw tight. Then let me speak clearly before the court. Let me say what truly happened. The Queen's eyes softened with sadness. My son, if you speak, they will not hear the truth. They will only hear a prince defending a maid. Clara flinched. She felt as though the room itself pressed her down. Friedrich took a step closer to his mother. Then what would you have us do? The Queen closed her eyes briefly. For a moment she looked older, worn by the weight she carried. When she opened them again, her expression was firm. You must dismiss Miss Weiss from your service. Clara's breath left her. She gripped the back of a chair to keep her balance. She felt Friedrich's shock like a current in the air. No, he said immediately. Absolutely not. The Queen remained calm. It is the simplest solution. The rumors will fade. Foreign interest will shift. The court will forget. Friedrich shook his head. I will not cast her aside because someone else decided to twist her kindness into scandal. She has done nothing wrong. Clara opened her mouth, but no sound came. The Queen stepped forward, her voice quiet but steady. Friedrich, I am not asking you to dismiss her from the palace, only from your personal quarters. She may remain in her position, but she cannot continue this arrangement with you." Clara finally found her voice. "Your Majesty, if my presence is causing harm, I will step aside willingly." Friedrich turned to her sharply. "No, you will not. You are not the problem." The Queen sighed, as if that was exactly the argument she had expected. "Friedrich, you have grown dependent on her presence. That is not healthy for you, nor is it fair to her." Friedrich's voice nearly cracked. "She is the only reason I can sleep, Mother." The Queen's expression softened. "I know. That is why this is so difficult. But she must be moved before malicious tongues grow louder. I cannot protect either of you from a rumor that appears to have truth behind it." Clara felt tears building behind her eyes. She forced them down. "I will do whatever your Majesty deems necessary." Friedrich's eyes widened. "Clara," she shook her head gently, "you must think of the kingdom, Your Highness, of your reputation." He clenched his fists. "I am thinking of you, of what is right." The Queen stepped between them. "Enough. The court will expect a public reassurance by morning. If Clara is seen taking her linens back to the servants' corridors tonight, it will ease suspicion." Clara felt her heart tear in two. She bowed her head. "I understand, Your Majesty." Friedrich took a step toward her. "Clara, please, don't do this. You should not be punished for my weakness." She lifted her eyes to his, and for a moment it felt as though the world narrowed to the space between them. Her voice trembled. "You are not weak. Not in any way. You have shown more courage than anyone gives you credit for." His breath caught. He shook his head. "I cannot lose your presence. Not like this. Not because of whispered lies." The Queen watched them with sorrow in her eyes. "Friedrich, please." He stood very still. His voice dropped to a quiet tremor. "Mother, if you force her from me tonight, you may calm the court, but you will break something in me that you cannot mend." Clara's heart nearly stopped at those words. The Queen closed her eyes, pained. After a long silence, she said softly, "Friedrich, I am not asking her to leave the palace, only to return to her regular duties, permanently." Clara took a step back. Her hands shook. She had no strength left to argue. She looked once more at the prince. He looked lost, like the ground beneath him had shifted. The Queen clasped her hands again. "Clara, you may go now. Prepare your things. Report to the service hall at once." Clara nodded weakly. "Yes, Your Majesty." She turned toward the door, her vision blurring at the edges. Friedrich called after her. "Clara, wait." She stopped, but did not turn. If she turned, she feared she wouldn't have the strength to walk away at all. Friedrich's voice broke. "I never wanted this," she whispered. "I know." Then she left the room. The corridor outside felt unbearably long. Her steps were slow, heavy, hollow. The palace that had once felt vast now felt like a labyrinth closing around her. By the time she reached the stairs leading to the servants' wing, she had to pause, gripping the railing to steady herself. She didn't realize someone was standing behind her until a voice broke the silence. "Miss Weiss." She turned slowly. The Countess stood at the bottom of the staircase, her expression triumphant in a way she barely bothered to conceal. "I hear Her Majesty has made her decision," she said. "A wise one, I should think." Clara said nothing. She had no strength left. The Countess stepped closer. "Do not look so distraught, my dear. This is for the best. The prince will recover his senses, and you will return to where you belong." Clara inhaled sharply, but before she could respond, a soft, hesitant voice came from the top of the stairs. "Clara?" She turned. Friedrich stood there, breathless, as though he had run to catch her, and when his eyes found hers, something in his face broke completely. Friedrich descended the steps slowly, as if each one carried the weight of a decision he could no longer postpone. Clara held her breath. The Countess stepped aside, startled by the sight of the prince addressing a servant so openly. But Friedrich paid her no attention. His eyes were fixed entirely on Clara. "Please, do not go yet," he said quietly. Clara clasped her hands together, trying to steady herself. "Your Highness, Her Majesty has spoken. I must follow her instruction." Friedrich stopped a few paces from her, breathless from emotion rather than effort. "I know what she said. I was there. But I cannot let that be the last word between us." He sounded fragile but not uncertain, more determined than she had ever heard him. Clara lowered her gaze, afraid her expression might betray too much. The Countess watched from the shadows of the hallway, but for once she did not interrupt. She simply observed, wide-eyed, as if witnessing something the court had believed impossible. Friedrich drew a careful breath. "I have been silent my entire life, silent at court, silent during my mother's counsels, silent in my own heart, and silence has protected no one, not even me," Clara whispered. "Your Highness." He shook his head, stopping her with a small gesture. "I must speak, Clara, not to the court, not to my mother, to you." She finally looked up. The pain and warmth tangled in his eyes nearly undone her. He stepped close enough for his voice to fall softly between them. "These weeks with you, they have been the first time I've felt human, not only a title waiting to be judged. I woke from sleep without dread. I spoke without fear of misspeaking. I breathed as though the air belonged to me." Clara blinked back a tear she had not meant to show. Friedrich continued, gentler. "That is not dependency. It is gratitude. It is trust. And those things are not shameful." Clara clasped her hands tighter. "I never wished to harm your reputation. I never meant to give the court reason to doubt you." His gaze softened. "I know. You gave them no reason at all. They made one from their own fears." The Countess shifted uneasily but remained silent. Friedrich reached for Clara's hand, hesitated just before touching it, then let his hand fall back to his side. His restraint broke her heart more than any touch could have. "Do you wish to leave my service?" he asked. The question struck her deeply. She shook her head before she could think. "No, Your Highness, I do not wish to leave." Relief washed over his face, quiet and profound. "Then do not let the Countess's threats guide your steps, and do not let my mother's fear overshadow your dignity." The Countess flinched at the mention of herself, but remained where she stood. Clara whispered, "The Queen only wants to protect the monarchy, and you." He nodded. "I know. But she cannot protect me from loneliness. Only I can do that, only by choosing whom I trust." Clara's throat tightened. She felt every emotion she had tried to silence rising to the surface. Gratitude, sorrow, affection she dared not name, and relief, the simple relief of hearing him speak plainly without hesitation or apology. He stepped closer. "Clara, I cannot ask you to stay in my room against my mother's orders. That would place you in danger. But I can ask one thing." She held his gaze. "Anything, Your Highness. Do not step back from me. Do not withdraw out of fear. Continue to speak to me as you have. Continue to let me seek comfort in conversation, even if not at night. Let us not lose what we have built, simply because others fear what they do not understand." Clara felt her breath tremble. I can do that." "Good," he whispered. The words settled between them like a promise. The Countess finally cleared her throat awkwardly. "Your Highness, this conversation is highly irregular." Friedrich turned to her calmly. "Countess, I appreciate your concern for the court's image, but I will decide whom I speak with and whom I trust." The Countess straightened, chastened. "Of course, Your Highness, if I may to withdraw." She backed away quickly, vanishing down the corridor with far less confidence than she had arrived. Silence returned. A softer one. Friedrich looked at Clara again. Her eyes glistened, but not with fear this time. With a quiet resolve, he offered her a faint smile. "I am not dismissing you, Clara, not from my staff, and certainly not from my life." Clara felt warmth spread through her chest, fragile and deep. "Thank you, Your Highness." He looked relieved, just hearing her voice steady again. "Come," he said gently. "Let me walk you back to the servants' corridor. Not as dismissal, but as reassurance. A promise that you still belong here." She nodded. And they walked in silence, peaceful, unhurried silence, side by side through the long hallway. People stepped aside when they passed, surprised at the sight of the prince escorting a maid, yet not a single whisper followed. Perhaps it was the calm expression on his face. Perhaps it was the confidence of his steps. Or perhaps the court had never seen him appear so certain of anything. When they reached the threshold of the servants' wing, Friedrich stopped. Clara turned to him, waiting. He said softly, "My nights will be difficult at first, but I will manage. And when I cannot, I will seek help, in daylight, with propriety, And with you, if you permit it. Clara smiled through the ache in her chest. I would not refuse you, Your Highness. He nodded once, as if sealing an unspoken pact. Then he stepped back, not wanting to linger in a part of the palace where he knew his rank did not belong. Good night, Clara, he said. Good night, Your Highness. He hesitated just a heartbeat before turning away. Clara watched him walk back down the hall, shoulders straighter than she had ever seen them. Something had changed in him. Not boldly, not dramatically, but clearly, as if he had discovered strength he never believed he owned. When he disappeared around the corner, Clara finally entered her quarters. The room felt smaller than she remembered, but not suffocating. Different, but not empty. She sat on her narrow bed and let out a trembling breath. The fear of the past days loosened its grip. The rumors, the threats, the reprimands, they had led to this moment of fragile peace. A peace built not on secrecy, but on honesty. She thought of Friedrich's words, of the trust he had offered her freely, without title, without formality. She touched her sleeve where his gaze had rested moments before. Her heart felt tender, fragile, and quietly hopeful. She knew the next days would not be simple. The court would watch closely. The Queen would be cautious, and Friedrich would have to learn to sleep without her presence beside him. But something had shifted. The distance between them, imposed by rule and expectation, no longer felt like a wall. It felt like a path. Narrow, perhaps difficult, but open. Clara lay down at last, exhaustion washing over her. For the first time since the arrangement began, she slept in her own bed. But her thoughts settled not on fear of the court, nor the Countess's threats, nor the Queen's warnings. They settled on the quiet truth in Friedrich's eyes, a truth that felt like the beginning of everything. And as dawn approached softly over the palace, Clara awoke with certainty instead of dread. Something had changed, and it would lead, she felt this with gentle conviction, to a morning unlike any she had known. The morning after Clara returned to the servants' wing carried a quiet tension through the palace. Whispers drifted in corners, but none reached her directly. She followed her routines with care, polishing silverware, changing linens, and helping in the kitchen as though nothing had changed. Yet everyone could sense something had shifted. She moved with a gentler purpose, a steadier breath, as if no longer hiding from shadows. By midday, a message arrived for her. The Queen requested her presence in the atrium. Clara wiped her hands and walked there with measured steps. She found Queen Adelheid standing near a table of correspondence, sorting letters with brisk motions. A pair of ministers stood nearby but withdrew when Clara entered. The Queen dismissed her attendants and turned. "Miss Weiss," she said, "I must ask again for your honesty. My son seems calmer today. He slept, though poorly. Yet he is no longer in distress. Have you spoken with him?" Clara folded her hands. "Only briefly, Your Majesty." Queen Adelheid studied her face. "And? Did he appear resentful?" Clara shook her head at once. "No, Your Majesty, only sorrowful. But he understands the need for propriety." The Queen exhaled slowly. Relief mingled with guilt. "You have handled this with grace, despite how unfair it must feel. I am not blind to your dignity, Miss Weiss, nor to your sincerity." Clara lowered her gaze. "Thank you, Your Majesty." The Queen hesitated. "I wish to protect him, and you as well, truly, but the court believes that any woman who grows close to a prince must hold an ulterior motive. I know this is unjust, yet it is the world we live in." Clara nodded with quiet acceptance. "I understand." The Queen stepped nearer, her face softening. "If I may speak frankly, I fear he is lonely in ways I never recognized. And I fear that solitude has done him great harm." Clara's voice trembled. "He is stronger than he believes, Your Majesty." The Queen paused, touched by her words. Then she asked something unexpected. "Miss Weiss, tell me truly, do you care for him? Not as prince, as man." Clara felt her breath catch. Her heart swelled so suddenly she feared the Queen might see it beating beneath her uniform. After a long moment she whispered, "Yes, I care for him deeply." The Queen closed her eyes for a moment, as if absorbing a truth she had dreaded and hoped for in equal measure. When she opened them again, there was no anger, only clarity. "Then you must help him today, more than ever." Clara blinked. "Today? Why today?" Before the Queen could answer, the doors to the atrium opened and a voice echoed down the corridor. "Mother, please, where is she?" Clara turned sharply. Friedrich strode into the room breathless, still in his morning coat, as though he had not stopped walking since sunrise. His eyes found Clara instantly, softening with relief. "There you are." Clara felt the world shrink to the space between them. The Queen stepped back, allowing him to approach. Friedrich stopped in front of Clara, lowering his voice. "I have spent the morning hearing ministers discuss possible marriage arrangements. Arrangements for me." He said the last words with quiet dread. Clara felt a stone drop inside her chest. The Queen looked away, guilt tightening her expression. Friedrich continued, louder now. "They expect me to choose a bride from among the visiting noble families. They say a match must be made before the year ends." Clara swallowed. "I see." Friedrich shook his head. "No, you do not see. Because they expect me to smile through the introductions, to bow, to converse, to pretend the idea does not fill me with dread," the Queen murmured. "Friedrich, please lower your voice." But he could not. He turned to her with rare firmness. "Mother, I cannot breathe in that council room. They speak of duty as if I am not sitting right beside them, as if I am a contract to be signed. A quiet, lonely contract." Clara stepped forward, her voice soft. "Your Highness, this is the life expected of you." He looked at her with an intensity that made her heart tremble. "But it is not the life I desire." The Queen closed her eyes, bracing for what she knew would follow. Friedrich said softly, "Clara, if you would permit boldness, I must speak plainly. For the first time in my life." Clara felt her pulse quicken. She glanced at the Queen, who remained silent, giving no sign of objection. Friedrich's voice dropped. "I cannot imagine a future in which I marry a woman chosen only because nobility demands it. A woman I cannot speak to. A woman who looks at me and sees a title, not a man." Clara's breath trembled. He continued, quieter still. "But when I look at you, I see more than comfort, more than kindness. I see the heart I wish beside mine." Clara's lips parted. She could not speak. Friedrich stepped closer, not touching her, only allowing sincerity to fill the air. "When I returned to my chamber last night without you there, the silence was unbearable. I realized I had grown accustomed not to your presence alone, but to your voice, your gentleness, your way of seeing the world." The Queen spoke gently. "Friedrich, the court will not accept." He turned to her. "They will if I speak first. If I speak boldly." The Queen's eyes widened. "Friedrich, you are not ready for what that requires. A declaration, especially for a woman of no rank, invites scrutiny, hostility, even political repercussions." Clara swallowed. She looked at the Queen. "Your Majesty, please. I never wished to disrupt your household or complicate the prince's life. If it is best, I will step aside, I swear it." Friedrich shook his head firmly. "No, you will not step aside. You have stepped aside your entire life. Please, do not do it now." Clara's eyes filled with tears she tried desperately to hide. Friedrich looked at his mother. "I choose her." The Queen inhaled sharply, not from shock, but from the weight of a son choosing his heart over tradition. She studied him, his determination, his trembling courage, and finally asked, "Do you truly understand what this means?" He nodded. "I do." She turned to Clara. "And you? Do you understand the world he would bring you into?" Clara whispered. "I do." The Queen stepped back, placing a hand over her chest. "Then I will not stand in the way." Friedrich exhaled, relief and disbelief mingling at once. Clara nearly collapsed from the weight of the moment, but she steadied herself. The Queen continued, more softly. "If you both truly wish this, you must present yourselves together, not as prince and servant, but as two people who have chosen one another." Friedrich turned to Clara with a tremor of hope. "Will you?" Clara looked up at him, feeling everything in her heart unfold at once. Fear, tenderness, longing, and a deep, steady love she could no longer deny. "Yes, Your Highness," she whispered. "I will." He stepped closer, as if the world itself urged him to. Clara felt her breath catch as he gently reached for her hand. This time he did not stop before touching her. He held her fingers carefully, reverently, as though the gesture itself was a vow. Clara whispered, "Your Highness, you must be certain." He smiled softly. I have never been more certain of anything. She felt tears spill before she could stop them. Friedrich brushed her cheek with the back of his hand, not boldly, but with a sincerity that made her heart swell. Clara leaned into the touch, not daring to close her eyes, afraid she might break the spell. Friedrich said gently, I do not wish to wait for the court's approval. I wish to speak with my mother first, then with the ministers, and after that I will ask you properly, not as a prince seeking a solution, but as a man seeking a partner. Clara's tears fell freely now. She nodded, unable to speak for a moment. He squeezed her hand. Walk with me. She followed him through the palace gardens, where winter roses bloomed in pale clusters. The air carried a faint chill, but neither felt it. They walked slowly along the stone path, side by side, their hands still lightly joined. Friedrich stopped near a fountain. The water shimmered softly, casting ripples of light across his features. He turned to her, his expression quiet and earnest. Clara, these past weeks have changed me. Not through scandal or fear, but through you. You showed me gentleness when I had forgotten what it felt like. You stood beside me without judgment. You listened when others only advised. And you touched my arm when I was drowning in dreams, a touch no one else dared offer. Clara felt her breath trembling. I only wished to bring you comfort. He shook his head gently. You brought me life. She pressed a hand to her chest, overwhelmed. He dropped to one knee. Clara gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. The fountain continued its soft murmur as though blessing the moment. Friedrich looked up at her with steady eyes. Clara Weiss, would you honor me not as prince but as man by becoming my wife? Clara sobbed once, quiet, overcome. She placed her trembling hands over his. Yes, she whispered. Then stronger. Yes, I will. Friedrich rose and pulled her into an embrace, not improper, not excessive, but full of emotion so deep it felt like shelter. Clara let herself melt into it, feeling every fear, every doubt, every whisper of gossip fall away like snow shaken from a branch. When he drew back, he held her face in his hands, gazing at her with unguarded tenderness. You have made me the happiest man in Austria, he whispered. And you have given me the bravest heart I have ever known, she replied. They stood for a long moment, the cold air forgotten, the palace distant, the world stilled around them. Clara lifted a hand to his cheek. Your Highness, Friedrich, may I ask one thing? Anything. Promise me you will sleep at peace from now on. Not because of my presence, but because you have found your own strength. Friedrich leaned his forehead against hers. With you beside me, I already have. He kissed her then, softly, reverently, with a tenderness that carried every word he could not speak. Clara felt warmth bloom through her, not bold, not hurried, but deep and certain. When they parted, he smiled. Come, let us tell my mother together. They walked back toward the palace, fingers intertwined. Not a prince and a maid, but two souls stepping toward a future chosen freely. And as they crossed the threshold of the great doors, sunlight broke through the clouds, filling the marble floor with gentle light. The palace, once heavy with silence, felt open, almost welcoming. Their steps echoed in harmony. Their hearts, for the first time, walked the same path. And the future that had once seemed impossible unfolded before them with the quiet certainty of a promise fulfilled. Thank you so much for listening to this story, all the way to the end. We hope it moved you as much as it moved us while telling it. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave us a comment telling us where you're listening from and what you liked the most. Rate this story from 0 to 10. What score would you give it? If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like as a show of support. That really motivates us to keep creating and sharing more stories full of emotion and life lessons. And before we go, we want to remind you that an exciting and heartwarming story recommendation will appear on the final screen. If you'd like to enjoy it, just click on the video. Thank you once again for being here, and we'll see you in the next story.